As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the balance of power in Europe was shifting, laying the groundwork for what is now known as the Great War. It was a time of tremendous change, of burgeoning industrial might and a delicate balance of power. The major powers of Europe, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, were locked in a complex web of alliances and rivalries. Britain, with its mighty navy and sprawling empire, was a global superpower. France, still smarting from the loss of Alsace-Lorraine to Germany in the Franco-Prussian War decades earlier, was eager to reassert its strength. Germany, under the rule of Kaiser Wilhelm II, was determined to challenge British naval supremacy and expand its own overseas empire. Russia, despite its vast size and population, was grappling with social unrest and economic stagnation. Austria-Hungary, a multi-ethnic empire with a myriad of internal tensions, was struggling to maintain its cohesion. And Italy, a relatively new nation-state, was eager to assert its place among the European powers. These nations were bound together by a complex network of treaties and alliances designed to maintain a balance of power and prevent large-scale conflict. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions were simmering. Nationalism was on the rise, and territorial disputes were becoming increasingly contentious. And then, on June 28, 1914, an event occurred that would shatter this precarious balance. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. This act of violence was the spark that ignited the powder keg of European politics. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the intricate web of alliances drew one nation after another into the conflict. With a single gunshot, the world was set on a path to one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. By August of 1914, the war had officially begun, and the world watched in anticipation as armies marched off to battle. The initial stages of the war were marked by swift movements and ambitious strategies. Among these was the infamous Schlieffen Plan, designed by Germany. The idea was simple on paper: quickly defeat France by sweeping through Belgium, then turn the full force of the German army east to deal with Russia. However, execution proved to be far from straightforward. The fortresses of Belgium proved a tougher nut to crack than anticipated, and the rapid advance into France was eventually halted at the Battle of the Marne. This battle, fought from the 6th to the 12th of September 1914, was a pivotal moment in the early stages of the war. The French, with assistance from the British Expeditionary Force, managed to halt the German advance and push them back. This marked the failure of the Schlieffen Plan and set the stage for a type of warfare that would come to define the First World War: trench warfare. Trench warfare was a grueling and horrific form of combat where opposing armies dug into the earth, creating a network of fortified positions to protect themselves from enemy fire. The land between the enemy trenches, known as no man's land, would become a deadly battleground. Soldiers lived in these trenches under terrible conditions, facing the constant threat of artillery fire, snipers, and disease. This was a far cry from the swift victory that many had initially envisioned. As the war dragged on, the optimism of the early days began to fade. The romantic notions of glory and honor in battle were replaced with the grim reality of life in the trenches. The world was beginning to realize that this was not a war that would be over by Christmas. As some had predicted, the war was proving to be neither quick nor easy, and the world was only just beginning to understand the true cost of this conflict. As the war dragged on, it spread beyond the borders of Europe, drawing in nations from around the globe. The Great War was not confined to the trenches of Europe. As the conflict continued, it began to touch corners of the world far removed from the initial battlefields. The Ottoman Empire, a vast power stretching across 3 continents, was one of the first to enter the fray. With its strategic location and historical ties to Germany, it was drawn into the conflict, opening up new fronts in the Middle East. Meanwhile, over in the east, Japan seized the opportunity to expand its influence. While its involvement was primarily in the Pacific and Asia, the ripples of its actions were felt worldwide. Japan's entrance into the war marked a shift, a recognition that this was not just a European conflict, but a global one. But perhaps the most significant entry was yet to come. Across the Atlantic, the United States had been watching the war unfold from a distance. Initially determined to remain neutral, the continuous German submarine warfare, famously known for the use of U-boats, changed the American stance. The sinking of ships, the loss of American lives, and the infamous Zimmermann telegram all pushed the United States into the war. These submarines, or U-boats as they were known, were a game changer. They prowled the depths of the ocean, striking fear into the hearts of those who dared to venture into the open sea. The use of this underwater warfare added a new dimension to the conflict, making the world's oceans a battleground. As nations from around the globe were pulled into the war, it was clear that the conflict had expanded beyond anyone's predictions. It was no longer a war among European powers. It was a global war, a war that was reshaping politics, societies, and lives across the planet. World War I was becoming a truly global conflict, with consequences that would reshape the world. By the end of 1918, the war was finally drawing to a close, but not without leaving its mark on the world. The relentless battles, the immense loss of life, the ravaged landscapes, and the uprooted societies were a testament to the destructive power of war. Yet, amid the devastation, there was a glimmer of hope. A hope for peace, a hope for rebuilding, a hope for a better future. The warring nations, drained of their resources and morale, finally sought an end to the conflict. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was signed, effectively ending the fighting. But this was not the end of the story. The armistice was merely a ceasefire, a pause in the hostilities. The terms of peace still needed to be negotiated. These negotiations culminated in the Treaty of Versailles, signed in June of 1919. This treaty, however, was met with mixed reactions. While it officially ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers, it placed full blame for the conflict on Germany, demanding hefty reparations that left the country economically strained and politically unstable. The end of the war also marked a shift in global power. Empires crumbled, new nations emerged, and the map of the world was redrawn. Societies were irrevocably altered, with the war leaving a lasting impact on politics, economics, and culture. The world was forever changed. The war had introduced new technologies and tactics that transformed warfare. It had exposed the horrors of chemical weapons and the potential for mass destruction. It had challenged old norms and values, leading to social and political reforms. The Great War had ended, but its effects would linger for generations. It served as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict, the futility of war, and the necessity for peace. It taught us lessons that continue to resonate today, reminding us of our shared history, our common humanity, and our collective responsibility to prevent such devastation from happening again. World War I, or the Great War as it was often called, was a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. A cataclysmic event that rumbled across the globe, leaving no stone unturned, no life untouched. In the span of just over 4 years, the world witnessed the true cost of global conflict. We began our journey with the prelude to the war, a complex web of alliances, political tensions, and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, which ultimately ignited the spark that set the world ablaze. It was a time of uncertainty, a time when the world held its breath, on the precipice of a war that would reshape the globe. Then the war broke out. It was a war unlike any other before it. It was a war fought not just on land but at sea and in the air. It was a war where the old ways of fighting were replaced with new mechanized methods. It was a war that saw the introduction of tanks, airplanes, and chemical weapons. As the war expanded, it pulled in nations from every corner of the globe. It was no longer a European conflict, but a world war. The front lines stretched from the trenches of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East, from the icy waters of the North Atlantic to the jungles of Africa. The war ended, but its impact was far from over. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the aftermath, was intended to ensure peace. Yet, it sowed the seeds for another, even more devastating conflict. The world was forever changed. Empires crumbled, new nations were born, and the map of the world was redrawn. As we remember World War I, we reflect on the lessons it taught us and the price the world paid for those lessons. It was a war that showed us the full extent of human capacity for destruction, but also for resilience and courage. A stark reminder of the costs of conflict and the enduring value of peace.